It's really from that moment that I started actively sort of fighting the world, and drugs became like just fuel on the fire. I went really kind of dark and aggressive in my drug use. You can probably see part of my persona here is I'm very smiley and I've got this very loving, and it's all true, but there is a 100% opposite, which is this furious animal that was hurt. I felt so angry and full of pain inside. So seeking pain outside was a natural expression. I always had a vision of myself as someone that could protect people because I've felt a lot of pain in my life. And I discovered that is not true. I can pretend, but when I'm under pressure, I hurt others because of my own pain. And at some point, I came to accept that I'm broken.
Hello and welcome to Ego is Here. Today I'm joined by Milton Schorr, actor, author, and recovering addict. His story is one of addiction, recovery, resilience, and learning that he was enough all along. Hello, Milton.
Hi.
So nice to have you here. And as you said before we started recording, today is your 21st, right?
Yeah, today is my 21st sobriety birthday. Yeah.
So happy birthday.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good auspicious date for the conversation.
Yes. So, Milton, what is your earliest memory of feeling different from other children?
Wow, of feeling different. If the question is of feeling like an addict, I have a different answer. So can I tell you both?
Yes.
So I actually have an immune disorder, which has meant that, and I was diagnosed with it about 10 years ago, but I was born with it and I didn't know. So I always had trouble with chest infections. So I was quite sick a lot when I was young. So often I would get cough mixture at night to help me sleep. And the cough mixture was delicious. It was strawberry flavored. And my mom always used to put me to bed when I was very young. And this was a wonderful memory, just her sitting with me in my room, her smell, her safety, and saying prayers with me, very good feelings. And then she would also give me a spoon of cough mixture, which I really liked, both because it tasted really nice, but also because it had codeine in it.
Yes.
So it made me feel nice. And always she'd put me to bed and then she'd go and turn off the light. And then I'd wait for her to walk down the passage. And as soon as she was gone, I'd quickly get up and drink some more cough mixture because I really liked it.
At what age?
This is like 4 or 5. I don't mean a lot. Like I wasn't getting high, but
yes.
That I think part of being an addict is enjoying good things and doing them more than others, and that's just something interesting
as well.
Well, then it wasn't about numbness. It's just because I liked the taste, but I was being sneaky. I waited for her to leave and then I snuck some. And I think that's a part of the addictive personality is it's thrill seeking. It's pushing the boundaries. It's loving sensation. It's definitely about numbness and anesthetic of unpleasant emotions, but it's also about enjoying good emotions.
Yes.
But then the first memory of feeling different, for me, it was very specific. My family, there was this amazing time until I was 6 years old where in my world, everything was perfect. I thought my parents' marriage was good and I thought everything was safe and perfect. But all of a sudden I learned that my father had left and my mom, just all of that safety and security disappeared in a moment. My mom was screaming, saying, "Dad's gone." And the money that we had, turns out my dad was bankrupt. So and my dad disappeared for years. I didn't see him. So this was a profound change. But then I also, where I was growing up, was a very conservative area where, we were the first family to have a divorce by 5 years. So
Yes.
where I certainly remember feeling different is being in a very conservative school with conservative religious families where I just didn't have a dad and everyone else did. And that was, because, normally addict stories start with, I never felt like I quite fitted in, maybe just because of your personality. But for me, there was a very specific reason. And that trauma that I experienced is a big part of the driving force of my addiction, which has also been the center of my recovery, is untangling all of that stuff.
Milton, now that you mentioned your mother, she said at some point, you shared that God comes first, my husband comes second, and my children come third. So how did hearing those words affect you as a child?
You've read the book.
I'm reading it.
Good. It affected me deeply. It hurt me a lot. As an adult, it makes perfect sense. She was right. That is how it's supposed to be.
Is it?
But yeah, I think so. God would represent your beliefs in the world for me. So of course your principles must come first. Otherwise, it's like that saying, if you're in an airplane crash, you put the mask on your own face first before you put it on the child, because otherwise you can't help the
Yes.
child because you've
Yes.
lost consciousness. In
But
the
usually
same
mothers
way,
would say, my children at least come second and then my husband. So
look, all I can say is within my mom's beliefs and the situation where she was very powerless. She was completely like she had no power of her own. She'd moved away to live with this man with her 3 children. We were all dependent on him.
yes.
That's what I,
Yeah.
and within that society, it was also a very conservative Christian society. The God comes first, and then the man, and then the children. And
The
also,
children.
I don't know if there's a Greek equivalent, but I'm an English-speaking South African, and we're quite liberal. And my stepfather was Afrikaans, which is very conservative and very patriarchal. So there was this big conflict between us just from culture.
Yes.
And she was also speaking about that. So, as an adult, I get it. But as a child, that if I had been secure, if I felt loved and seen and in alignment with my stepdad, then those words probably would have been a source of comfort. Like, oh, that's the system. I understand my place in the system. But it wasn't. The system was broken. And then the message was, then you fit even less. So that was really a big source of my rebellion. It's really from that moment that I started actively sort of fighting the world, and drugs became like just fuel on the fire. I went really kind of dark and aggressive in my drug use.
And your classmates created a petition to have you removed from school.
Yes, yeah.
How did that affect you at that time? And what was it, what was your behavior like back then that led them to take such an extreme step?
It's very interesting to me. I was just so angry. I had a wonderful breakthrough recently, which hopefully can be a part of our conversation, which is, living in sobriety or living in recovery, where it's very true that, when you put the drugs down, you have to contend with the reasons you picked them up in the first place.
Of course.
And now you don't have an anesthetic to help you. And so I've never had a relationship that didn't end in just chaos, and not necessarily violence. It has happened, but just awful hell, emotional hell. And I went through a string of experiences in the last sort of 4 years that I became violent in a relationship, which scared me. And I went to a therapist, and she helped me see by just asking and just the way she was that I have been or had been furious about my feeling of abandonment from childhood my entire life. And the word is furious. And I didn't know it. I honestly had no idea. You can probably see part of my persona here is I'm very smiley and I've got this
Yes.
very loving, and it's all true. But there is a 100% opposite, which is this furious animal that was hurt. And I had no idea. She said to me, I think you might be angry. And I went, what? I'm not angry. Are you sure? Wouldn't that child have been angry? And suddenly I realized I have had this fury locked away, and everything is fine because I have strong principles and discipline, and I work very hard, and I really care about doing your best. So I do well at keeping the fury locked away, but it used to come out in road rage, complete impatience when someone is not doing their job properly. Classic sort of toxic male stuff,
Yes.
toxic white man stuff, which it's just, but they're actually just doing their best. They're just trying to be strong. I was just trying to be strong, and I didn't know I was furious. So the reason my classmates had me removed is because I was furious and doing so much drugs that I was extremely high all the time in high school. So I just fought, and I just had no rules. I was utterly
So when did addiction start
uncontrollable.
for you?
I
When
started,
did it really begin?
my first drink of alcohol was at 14. But for me, I would say my addiction began at the age of 12 with stealing. I started stealing at school because it was a real rush and a thrill. And also it made me notorious. People would talk about me and like, wow, Milton's just so crazy. Did you hear what he did? And then smoking cigarettes is a step up, and it's a first substance. The cigarette gave me such identity, such security, and also notoriety. And then porn, so cigarettes 12, porn at 12. Porn was such a massive emotional hit. I just loved what I saw so much. It made me feel so much sensation. It was absolutely a drug, and I've used porn as a drug all my life. So to me, those are real markers. But the first real substance was alcohol, and that was at 14. And then it just went very quick from there. Within the same year, marijuana, and then mandrax, cocaine, ecstasy, LSD, heroin, everything within the next 3 years. Yeah.
So you said that drugs took away the feeling, that you weren't enough. Do you remember the first time you felt that relief, that
Yes. Yeah,
that
my
feeling
first
of
drink.
being enough?
Yeah, I was home alone, and I write about it in the book. I was sneaking around because I was already a little thief and a little rebel. But part of that is also just family dynamics. My older sister started drugs first, and she became a rebel first. And she became a rebel because of the violence in our home and the absence of my father, the abandonment. Life was very difficult. So, and I was invisible, the middle child, and also the only boy in the house. It was me, two sisters, and a mom. So I started copying her, and she was stealing and being violent and taking drugs and getting arrested. So, this is addiction also. You do what you see, and, you learn it. So I was home alone and sneaking around my mom and my stepdad's bedroom, and I found the keys to his safe. So I opened the safe, and in there was brandy, and I thought, let me drink some. I didn't drink much, but it made me so happy because I was so incredibly unhappy, especially at that time. We'd moved away from the city to a very rural area, which I hated. I was a city kid. And suddenly everything was perfect. I was singing and laughing and stumbling around. And this is something that I try and talk about, which perhaps non-addicts don't understand, is because non-addicts sort of think surely the using addict in their life, when they see the consequences of their actions, they'll stop. But
Usually.
But this is the thing. If for an addict, the only time they feel okay is when they're high. So why would someone choose to be miserable, profoundly, deeply miserable? Because this is the thing.
But you said that you were attracted to darkness and pain.
It's a part of my personality. I think perhaps because of the anger, but then that's also part of my personality. There's so many things, everyone's different. Yeah.
Yes, of course, of course. But, I'm trying to understand because most people spend their lives, trying to avoid pain, but you were drawn to it in a way.
Well, I have this phrase like understanding you. It's like I love metal music. I love extreme music and other lovers of extreme music. I'm fairly sure it's because our internal world is quite intense. Intense emotions, intense thought patterns. The music matches that. And so if your inside matches your outside, you reach equilibrium and then it's peaceful. So for me, I felt like that inside. I felt so angry and full of pain inside. So seeking pain outside was a natural expression that made sense to me. And I think it's similar to sort of self-harm. I've never been a self-harmer. People that cut themselves for relief. But it's a form of control. And to me, that's what drugs are. Everyone picks their substance, but ultimately what your substance is a form of control. You can control your emotions with the substance. Cutting is a very specific ritual where you are now in control and nothing exists. And it's strong enough to battle the intensity of the emotions. That's my understanding of it, really.
And what was it about heroin, that made you think this is what I've been looking for?
It was the most intense option, the most legendary one. A lot of it came from movies, Basketball Diaries. I watched Basketball Diaries when I was 16, and at the darkest parts, I always just thought, that is what I want. I want to be that fucked up. That looks right. But it's interesting. I don't know if you've ever seen this movie called Bullet with Tupac Shakur and Mickey Rourke.
No.
It's from the mid-90s. And I just watched it last night. I'm still finishing it this morning, just out of sort of melancholy. And I realized how much that movie affected me because Mickey Rourke's character is this heroin addict loser. But there's something, it's an archetype, this strong man in pain who holds the pain. It's a martyr. It's the martyr archetype. And that was very attractive to me. And that's been my pattern. Part of why I've not had a good relationship is I don't know how to deal with emotions healthily or much better today. But the way I defaulted was, I'm going to hurt myself to hurt you. I hurt myself to hurt my mother. I hurt myself to hurt my father. But I also am controlling their attention.
Yes.
I mean, this to me is it's the inner workings of addiction. It's so sick and petty and twisted. It's these spider webs of control. That's what I was doing. And then when I put the drugs down, discover, I don't know how to relate to someone healthily. But it's because I never felt like I was enough. So the only way to keep someone's attention was to force them, because otherwise, why would they be interested in me? Because I'm not enough. That's the center of it.
Yes.
AA book puts it so well. It's self-centered fear is the center of addiction. And I think it's very true. Addicts come from this place of,
When did you hit rock bottom?
So my final rock bottom, I think it's important to say that, is you'll have many, but the last one is the last one,
Yes.
depending on where you go. My final rock bottom was at the age of 24, 25. Yeah.
Can you tell us
Yeah.
what was happening at
Yeah.
the time?
For me, what was happening is so part of my addiction journey was multiple kinds of addictions that I wasn't aware of. So I knew I was a hardcore drug user throughout high school, and I went to university to study theater. I happened to have a passion, which I'm so lucky. That's a big part of the reason I'm sober today, is I happened to have a passion.
Yeah,
My
because it's a
friends that
driving
didn't make
force.
it. Yeah,
Yes.
it's something
Yes.
bigger than you to live for, because
Uh-huh.
if you don't value yourself, as addicts do, if I don't think I'm worth much, how am I going to fight the cravings for me?
Uh-huh.
I'm not a
Uh-huh.
reason. But if I have a passion, then there's something to live for. So I went to university, and there I discovered studying, and I became a workaholic, unbeknownst to me. In one moment, I stopped all drugs, from being high every waking second to studying every waking second. It happened in a second. I just started
It's
studying.
unbelievable.
Yeah, and then it's you,
Especially for someone like you, huh? I mean,
and it seems like a positive thing. You think, oh, look how well I'm doing, but I wasn't doing well, because I wouldn't study the syllabus. I would just study what I wanted to study. So I actually didn't get good marks anyway.
yes.
And I didn't even know that I was doing it, because I was so obsessed. It's so unhealthy. And my whatever small relationships I had, at least I had drug friends, that all disappeared, because then I just isolated and studied, and I had no relationships. But then I also had, but then every now and again, I'd have a romantic relationship that became my drug: codependency, sex and love addiction, unaware. So by the time I was 24, I'd cycled through different phases of addiction, being unaware. But what is always happening in active addiction is your connection to yourself and your own spirit, and even your soul, is becoming more and more fractured, because in order to use, you have to repress your essence, because it's self-destructive. And then there's this term called spiritual bankruptcy, where you end up just being empty. I describe it like the world is ash. There's no reason for being alive anymore. There's nothing between me and the world. Everything is a shadow. And I had a son at 21. I didn't stay with his mom, but I was always very prepared not to abandon him like I'd been abandoned. And that's the other reason I've stayed clean, is because I just refused for my son to have my experience, which was kind of easy. It's like, that's the positive side of anger. It's a very powerful motivation. And so I was incredibly depressed and empty, and had started using drugs again in secret, like using heroin in secret. And was at the tail end, like 11 years of constant hard addiction that had been taking its toll on me. And I got to a point where I was meant to see my son the next day. I was meant to take him out for an outing. And the night before, I just went out for one beer, just to be a human, a civilized person, have a beer after work. And I ended up meeting a man and smoking meth with him all night and having sex, which was very traumatic, because I'm not gay. So it was very in my face. I'm not used to it. If it had been a woman and we'd had sex, I wouldn't have been that confronted by the behavior. And then the next morning I had to, phone my son's mom and tell her that I've got the flu and I can't pick him up. And I just realized, like, I can't. There's no way out of this. But actually what happened is, for the first time in my life, I did my first rehab at 18. I had a deal with my real father that they were buying me heroin so I could finish my exams on the proviso that as soon as I finished, I'll go to rehab. So I literally got picked up from my last exam and taken to rehab, which didn't take at all because I was just on methadone the whole time and I didn't understand anything. This is the thing, addiction relies on denial to function. You can't be an active addict and sane at the same time because you are killing yourself and your loved ones. You must be insane to do that, or a psychopath. So this rock bottom at the age of 25, where I was supposed to go and see my son, and even I had breakfast with my mother the following morning. So I had to go and have breakfast with my mom, and I was just so disgusting and still high. And, like existentially, it was hard.
Yes.
And suddenly I had this thought, but it's the drugs. The drugs are the problem. I'd always seen myself as someone with emotional problems. I've been in so much trouble and expelled and no relationship ever works out. I know I have emotional problems and the drugs were a solution. They helped. And suddenly at this time was the first time that I had this thought, but it's the drugs that are a problem. And I'm a drug addict. That's the problem. Even though I'd been to rehabs and been to 12-step meetings, I'd never actually seen it that way. And to me, that is so profoundly important. I've found in 21 years of sobriety that what really makes a change is understanding why you do things. Once you see the pattern, it must die. You can't carry on.
Yes.
You have to lobotomize yourself to carry on. I'd never seen that I was a drug addict. And that's how powerful denial is. Again, a loved one of a using addict will ask me, what do I do? And my answer is, there's nothing you can do if they can't see it. And it's so crazy that they can't see it, but they can't. To them, they're living in the solution,
No, something that I really admire in you is that, you take responsibility. And that to me is very important. Tell me about shame.
Well, my experience of shame, part of the reason I'm so bold is because I am so bold, which has pros and cons, It helps me in life, but it also causes a lot of problems. But so the messaging I got when I was a kid was in the midst of the devastation of my dad not being there and our family just fighting for survival. My mom would say to me, "Your father is a shit man. You've seen what your father does. You've seen what shit men do. You won't be a shit man." And I internalized that. And that's why I work so hard to earn my integrity. But because I'm not in alignment, I'm repressing something rather than releasing something. There's these moments where I get triggered. My shame is all around how I've not been able to be the man I might look like, which is this trustworthy, loving, strong person. Because in my intimate life, every relationship I've ever had has ended up being over because I am not safe. And that shame is deep for me of I'm not good enough. I'm not able to love. It's horrible. But I have
overcoming shame harder than overcoming addiction?
No, for me, it's nothing. It's just another word for a difficult state. And it's just another opportunity or entrapment. So I've had a temper problem my whole life. At a certain point, I cannot control my temper. And as I've gotten older and with more insight, really seen how because I've had decades of justifications why I'm right and why it's okay for me to act out on my temper at times. And slowly over time, as people have been hurt, I've learned the hard way that those justifications don't work because they keep the temper going, and that it cannot be. It's just the same for me as realizing I cannot use drugs because then I can't control myself. I cannot act out on my temper because then I can't control myself. But learning about my temper much harder than learning about drugs. Drugs are black and white. Just don't do it. That's it's not that simple, but it's very clear to measure it. But your temper is this vague mix of everything within that takes much longer to figure it out. And so shame has been the driving force to figure it out. I can't actually believe, I always had a vision of myself as someone that could protect people. Because I've felt a lot of pain in my life, and I discovered that is not true. I am not someone that can protect people. I can pretend, but when I'm under pressure, I hurt others because of my own pain. And at some point, I came to accept that I'm broken and I have to, so I can't be close to people. I have to keep everyone at a distance because then I can be a protector, but I can't open myself up too much because it's not possible, which was a shameful and sad way to live in essence. And lately I can actually say that no, I am able to be close to others because I've come to understand how my trauma fuels my temper. And through understanding, I'm no longer controlled by it. So shame, and the reason I've come to understand, and the reason I got sober was because of shame. I was ashamed of myself that I couldn't pitch up for my son. I was ashamed of myself that I couldn't care for the people I love. And so I'm not sure what your question is sort of driving to, but my experience of shame is it's such a powerful motivator because for me, it's become like it became rock solid for me that I'm not going to use drugs. I'll rather die. It's just clear. It's not it just is.
It's a fact. Yes,
which means that my danger is suicide. It's not relapse. And that is what I've grappled with many times because shame is probably the state closest to, okay, I've had enough. It's the most horrible place to be, but also then it's the darkest, it's the darkness before the dawn. My take on recovery is, I like this equation. Recovery equals abstinence plus change. If you're just abstinent but you don't change, nothing's happening. How do you change? I've spent so many years in different therapies and 12-step programs, and it's a continuous question of someone saying, what do I do? What am I supposed to do? And the answer is you face your fears. That's the answer. And you can face silly fears like, I don't know, I'm afraid of lions, so you go to the zoo. It's silly. But if you do that, you will be reclaiming a little piece of yourself that had been stolen by the fear. Or you can face a big fear, like, I don't know if I can be in a relationship because I'm scared of myself. That's huge, right? So you pick your battles, and slowly but surely. Shame is an expression of your ultimate fear. You don't feel shame unless your behavior has messed with your principles in such a core way,
Yes.
So my take is shame it's powerful. And, step one for me, I don't know how aware you are of sort of 12-step sort of terminology or.
No, I know
But
about the
so
job.
step one is, coming to believe that you're powerless over addiction and your life has become unmanageable. So basically step one is proving to yourself that you can't use drugs because you're an addict or whatever the substance is. But part of step one is, what are your reservations? So in ending step one, I would say the person is supposed to have a little document that is like proof, your card of membership. I cannot use drugs because this is how I am when I use them. Cool, proof. We agree. But now hang on. What reservations do you have that under those circumstances, it would be okay to use drugs? So for instance, for me, a big part of getting sober was I refused to let my son become an addict like me. So then, okay, well, what if your son was to die? Would you still then want to be sober? Good question. And if your answer is no, that's a problem. That's a weakness in your step one, because your step one should be rock solid. And that's where your shame's going to be. Your biggest fears are going to show you, your weaknesses are going to show you where you want to grow to. So
Milton was writing your book, Addict, healing.
Yes, not as healing as you'd think, because I'd been telling my story for 20 years in 12-step fellowships, and then it became an exercise in writing it down. But so that catharsis, it wasn't really this catharsis, but what has been incredibly profound, and it's been a part of me being able to say today that I don't identify with being a broken person anymore, is having to lay it all down and understand the narrative and make a narrative, make it make sense in a linear way, has just shown me this happened when I was a kid and I responded in this way, and then that happened, and so I responded like that. There's no mystery. It's helped me see that there's nothing not solvable in my addiction and my problems. It's all cause and effect. Sometimes it's tricky, and sometimes you need specialized help or whatever. But I've discovered for me that what I thought was impossible to solve is actually very mundane. It just takes seeing it. And so writing it out really helped me to see it. And I've now been writing.
What was the hardest part of your story to put on paper, if there was any?
I suppose like the gay sex. I'm quite a straight type, but I mean, I'm an artist. It's not like, but just those sorts. It's that petty, like those little bits of personality. But I think what was just in total, what was the hardest was this sense of, geez, everyone's gonna know everything, and then my face is on the cover. That wasn't my idea. The publisher said, well, we have to put your face on the cover. That's how you sell these books. But that's also been incredibly freeing, because it's made my purpose in life even more real. The Addict is the third book I've written, not the first. I've been a storyteller and a writer my whole life. So Addict is an expression of that. And my stories have always been about trying to understand my own emotional difficulties. So to have released it all in the public like this, now I have nowhere to hide. And now I don't have to defend anything either. So if someone asks me a question, I can just answer it. Like, come on, what are you embarrassed about? What have you done in the dark? What have you thought? What was maybe tricky is, I pretty much made my father the villain of the story, because really a story needs a villain, just in terms of the dynamics of a story. You need, you need drama and conflict. So of course, reality isn't as black and white as the book. And I also intentionally only wrote it from my subjective point of view. So I'm explaining his life from the point of view of a 6-year-old. I mean,
Of course.
that doesn't. And then to his credit, he just once or twice he went like, "That's not quite what happened," but then he just stopped and just left it and went, "You know what? It's your experience. You go
Mhm,
on your
mhm.
journey." And that's immense. So that's been really healing, is within my family, because everyone's affected by addiction and everyone's read it, and it's caused much better relationships with everyone, which weren't too bad to begin with anymore. I mean, my dad's 30 years
Mhm.
sober. Um, yeah.
So, Milton, tell me now, what drew you to acting?
Acting, it's funny. Acting has never been my passion. I love, it's fun. It's so much
Mhm,
fun, but I love storytelling, and acting is a form of storytelling. And I happen to be better than average at it. So it became a way to make a living. It was never the goal. My goal was always to be a writer and a director. But what drew me to storytelling is grace. I got a hand-me-down computer when I was in my teens, 14 or 15, and I was up late one night, busy smoking and thinking and writing. I was writing a
mhm,
short story about my friend's father, who's a very funny character. And I suddenly realized that I was at peace. It's kind of what we spoke about earlier with like an intense personality that enjoys extreme music. Suddenly there's
mhm,
peace
mhm,
because the gears have suddenly aligned. And I'll never forget that moment of just sort of sitting back and realizing that, because I was just watching this character appear in the computer. I wasn't creating it. It was just
mhm,
coming through my fingers. And I loved it so much. But I lived in just a rural area. There was no sort of arts.
mhm.
But then I got expelled from school and I went to live with my dad in the city. And my new school offered drama, theater. And I just took the subject thinking it looks interesting, having no clue what it really was, what theater was. And then the first class, I could understand the language. I knew
Mm.
exactly what the teacher was talking about. I was already 5 steps ahead. Like I could see it all. And I just knew this is my thing. This is it. How lucky am I? I have so many friends who either didn't make it at all, who just died from addiction, or
Mhm.
relapsed so many times and they're okay, but they're so injured because they never had a passion.
Yes.
I just happen to have one. So it's complete grace, complete God's will. It's got
Mhm.
nothing to do with me. I just love it. I love stories so much.
So, tell me, because the film industry, is built on rejection. For
Yeah.
someone who has already struggled with feelings of not being enough, how difficult um, is it to hear a no over and over again?
It only depends on what value you place in their opinion. So when I had an interesting experience at drama school at university. It's a very artsy environment, and I was this sort of avant-garde type artist, and I was
Mhm,
the absolute alpha. I just did the most shocking things and the cleverest stuff, and then I went into the world and tried to go to commercial castings,
mhm.
and I was the worst. Like I went from being the best to the worst because an avant-garde shocker is not who you want in your shampoo commercial.
Yes.
And I did not know that. I didn't know anything. And it was horrific how hard the rejection was, and also comparing yourself to others, and others are being successful. And it, because my whole identity was based around my ability as a person in the arts. And I just was not succeeding in any way. And the things I did succeed at, which was making theater works, which were wonderful, but niche. So they made no money. So I had no self esteem whatsoever. None. I mean, it was horrifying how difficult it was, and moments of just like in a casting, in an audition, and doing your best knowing you're doing just the wrong thing and it's just getting worse. And
Mhm, mhm.
but then what happened for me is eventually I had to leave that because I had to earn money. So I asked myself, well, what can I sell that I have? And I knew I could write articles. I could do that. I couldn't be in the shampoo commercial,
Mm-hmm.
but I could write an article about something. It had to maybe be mildly interesting, but was my compromise. So then I worked, and that led to a corporate job for a little while. Interesting job in mixed martial arts. It wasn't completely corporate, but it
Mm-hmm.
was working in an office. And I learned that my skills are immense and very valuable. And
Mm.
I had no idea, because as a working artist, I was never paid. And so I thought I was worth nothing. And then I walked into a corporate office and discovered that these people are like idiots. Because they've just been in an office doing the one thing they're told to do every day, whereas I'm used to doing 50 things to survive and everything
Mm-hmm.
must be
Mm-hmm.
excellent. So that gave me some self-confidence. And then I returned to acting, and I also suddenly grew a beard. I grew a beard at about the age of 30.
Uh-huh.
And all of a sudden, I looked like something. Because that's all acting is do you
Mm-hmm.
look like someone? Not how good are you? Do you look like someone? I never looked like anyone. I was always this weird, tall, scrawny, weird thing. Suddenly I looked like a dad, and I started getting work. But I knew that it meant nothing, because I'd already survived the illusion that people's opinions have anything to do with my self-worth, because it really nearly killed me. I mean, so rejection in acting is awful if a rejection means you're not worthy of your dreams. The only way to do it is to understand that it's got nothing to do with you. And truly, in almost every case, you become more successful the less importance you place on the outcome. So now as an actor, but it's interesting, as I grew in acting and got more experience, then still those high pressure situations do come back. Like I became completely unafraid of the shampoo commercial, but I have had moments where I was afraid of being up for the lead in a big studio show. And then your old insecurities come back. And again, that's been the growth. It's like, I'll get better and better, because really acting is about handling pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not
Yes.
hard to act. If you can do it, you can do it. If you can't do it, it's very hard. If you can, it's like talking. But can you handle the pressure?
The pressure.
And then I've had these moments of bigger stakes, and then I've not handled, been a little bit off, so I didn't get the role. But I know next time I go into that room, I know that the only problem here is that I'm thinking it matters. The only way to do this is to know their opinion doesn't matter. Like, it's just like, the only way to stay alive is to eat food. You can't, it's simple.
Yeah.
So,
Tell me, what is
yeah.
your greatest memory from being an actor, like from being on set? Because you've been on some very major movies and
Yeah. I think my greatest memory, well, my most profound memory, is having a full on panic attack because I suddenly believed I wasn't good enough,
Mm,
because I saw the director as a father figure, because I'm an abandoned child. And
yes,
suddenly
yes,
I imprinted on the
yes.
director, and he was even younger than me, and I needed his approval.
Mm,
And there's no time to explain stuff. And I literally had a full on panic attack and poke faced my way through the entire thing, and thought it was the worst performance possible and couldn't understand how I got through it. And then watched it when it came out a year later, and I was actually like really great.
see?
and and that was immense, profound.
Mm,
But then there's a flip side. So that's my worst memory. My best memory would be the last project I did, which was a short film for a local film festival. So it wasn't that high profile, but it was a realization of my goals, because as I've told you right in the beginning, I was completely inept. I couldn't do it. And I was so full of fear. And I would always look at more senior actors and people that earned a living and think, how do they exist? I don't understand. I couldn't even begin to put it together. And my last experience, I was one of the leads, and there I was handling all the dialogue, all the angles, all the set politics, all the status conversations between the different department heads and the creatives and the technicals, and all of my experience over 20 years, all being there, to me being that guy that I thought it was impossible to be. Someone who is utterly confident and good and like I don't know, like functioning. And that feels wonderful because it's a fear-faced. It's I can call myself an actor. I know what the craft is. And those are my best moments. Yeah.
So you've worked in films, published books, and build a life beyond addiction. Which achievement means the most to you today?
Today, it's so wonderful. Having my son was very traumatic for me because I was an abandoned child. Call it that. I call it that for me because it helps me to not forget
Yes.
myself. And my son was literally like, and my inner child alive in the world that I had no relationship with. And I was just terrified of him. And I did not want to be a father. It's not something I chose. And I was open about not having chosen that, not in front of him. My goal was always that he will never know anything that makes him feel unsafe. And over time, I had to grapple with that because when he was about 16, it sort of came to pass that I realized he's not dead, but he doesn't need me anymore. I don't need to be sober for him anymore. And I had to then reconfigure that reservation in my step one. And I had this realization that I haven't chosen him and my fatherhood in my life. I'm living it like it's an obligation, not my choice, which means I'm not fully alive. I'm still stuck with, these small excuses. It's small, but it's profound. And that was a huge realization. Like, I cannot, am I not appreciating what is? And that led to starting to actually get benefit from my own life rather than dreaming about some other life. So my greatest achievement today, 1000%, is my son. It's the fact that he is healthy and not traumatized, and I don't see him that often. We speak once a month. We have dinner once a month. He's just graduated university. He's studying, but the amount of completeness that I feel from that is total, and it matters. That was my biggest job, and I did it. And I didn't do it on my own. His mom and his stepdad actually raised him, but I was always there. I was never a mystery in his life. I was always 100% available, and I didn't pass the stuff on. So that's actually meaningful. Yeah.
Listen, what would you say to the person listening right now, who believes they're too far gone, too damaged, or too broken to change?
I would say that if I was someone who would have made a difference in my life when I was young, would have been an adult who recognized me, who understood my pain and was able to accept it and hold it and show me that I don't need to be afraid of it. So what I would say to someone is, what you're going through is very hard. It is very real. And you can check out if you want to. You can call it quits, and I'll understand, because I've had a few moments where I was really done. But in every dark pain is the same amount of freedom and joy. And I know this. In every shame that I've felt, in every real injury, I've uncovered parts of myself that I lost, and finding them and putting them together has made life just beyond words. It hasn't made life easy, but so worthwhile. An image I like to use is, it's like going on a hike up a mountain. And sometimes it's really tough, like you in thorn bushes and you can't see anything, and it's tropical
Yes.
heat.
Mhm.
And it's just the worst pain you can imagine. Like everything is cutting you, and there's even a panther following you, you know?
Yeah, it couldn't get worse.
Yeah. But there always comes a point where you crawl out into a clearing and see the view. And the view is, man, it's good. But if you're struggling to just appreciate the view, which I have done many times, when you're empty, then nothing matters. What counts for me is looking back at all of those thorn bushes, but now from a height, and realizing I got through that. I've come this far. Wow, I own that. That's the pleasure of life for me, is
Yes, yes.
stealing back what was stolen from me, or taking it back, reclaiming it. That's that moment of being on set, realizing this is my climax. I am now that guy that people look up to, and I never thought I could do this. It was
Mm.
unbelievable to me to be this calm in this pressure. And then you look up and there's another peak and another hard walk. And do that, the view is essentially the same, it's just higher, but now you've done two sections which live
Mhm.
inside you. So what
Yes.
I want to say to someone that's struggling is, as empty as you feel and as worthless and as lost, 100% the possibility of feeling the exact opposite is real and can be yours. And there is so much help out there. I spent so long not knowing what to do. My experience is I was always in 12-step programs, and the message there is one addict helping another. Therapy doesn't
Mhm.
work for us. I agree. I don't think therapy really works for addiction. Active addiction, you can't talk about it. It's a primal force. You need a community that
Mm.
can hold you. But trauma is not handled in 12 steps at all. Even though it might seem like it, it's not. I
Mm.
spent so many years just doing the steps and not having any relief until I started understanding there's other things out there. There's so much help available. And your life circumstances do not matter. The shortest cut to happiness is being in the darkest place. And I'm not saying that as a justification. I'm saying that as a
Mhm.
fact. Like,
Mhm.
you don't need a big house to suddenly realize your life is a miracle, you know? You just need an awakening.
Mm.
And it's easier to have an awakening when you're living on the streets than it is in a big house. One day we want both. We want the big house and the awakening. But you don't need the big house. You just need the awakening.
Exactly.
I hope
I
that
agree.
someone could feel that, because that is really, I would love to give something to someone that's struggling and go, hey, look, it's actually the opposite.
Mm.
It's actually the opposite. But I feel you, man. It's hard. Yeah.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
So, Milton, thank you so, so much for being here today. I
What a
really, really
pleasure.
enjoyed the
Thank
conversation.
you.
And happy birthday again.
Ah, yes.
21
I
years
forget. Yeah.
recovery. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Anna. Yeah, that was wonderful.
Thank you too. Thank you too. And to all of you out there, as we always say, ego is here. You are here. And that's enough.